Okay, so this is quadratic equations, section 4-5. Our focus today is to solve quadratic equations by factoring. Tomorrow we'll focus on by graphing. So for your bell work today, I've got some basic factoring for you to do, and that is to simplify and solve. And you've got three problems here at the bottom, but I first want you to copy two examples. This, you don't have to write all those rules to the side, and B. So copy these examples so you have this in your notes. Okay, and you're going to do it like this one for these three. Then work 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I'm going to give you 4 minutes for these, and then we'll come back. I'm going to pause the video. Let me set your timer. I'm going to pause the video now. Okay, so time's up. Let's see, row 1 and 2, write what you got for number 1 on your whiteboards. Rows 3 and 4, write what you got for number 2 on your whiteboards. And the rest of you, write number 3 on your whiteboards. And let's see what you got. Guys, that should be something you have on your desk every day, whether we use them or not. So make sure you do that before class starts. Okay, row 1 and 2, let's see your work. Okay, I see 2 answers. I see 2 square root of 3 and 3 square root of 2. Okay, so let's hold that. Okay, next 2 rows, let's see what you got for number 2. Hold it up nice and high. Come on. Rows 2 and 3, hold your whiteboards up. I see 5 radical 3. I see a few blanks. And 7 radical 3. Okay, and my last 2 rows, what did we get for number 3? I have, hold them up, negative 2 radical 8. I have negative 4 radical 2. I have radical 16 times radical 2 and negative 4 radical 2. Okay, so let's see how many of you on number 1 think, we'll call that response A and this response B. How many of you, with show of hands, believe the correct answer is A? Nobody? How many of you think the correct answer is B? Okay, and I have, out of a class of 24, I have like 6 people answering. I should have a lot more of you being decisive there. Well, let's look. We have radical 18, and our first step is to do what? Write this in factors that are perfect squares. A perfect square factor would be a number as a result of squaring another number, right? So 3 squared is 9. What's 2 squared? 4. What's 5 squared? 25. Okay, so you get the idea. So if you can write it in terms of one of these things that are a factor of the number that is a perfect square of another number, you're on the right road. So does 18 have a perfect square factor? How about 9? 9's a perfect square, right? 9 is a perfect square of what? 3. So that's what you want to do. You want to get one of those factors down to a number that's a perfect square of another number. And 9 is a perfect square of 3. So we've got 9 times what? 2. All right. So now that we have 9 times 2, we can rewrite this as radical 9 times radical 2. And what is radical 9, or the square root of 9? 3. And radical 2 is simplified. So our answer, that's as simple as we can get it, is the 3 radical 2. For our 6 people who raised their hand, good job. Okay, so and those of you who were stuck or haven't done this in a while, hopefully it's turning on your light bulbs and you're starting to understand now. Any questions on that one? All right. So our correct answer was 3 radical 2. So we'll delete that one. Whoops, not that one. Yeah, it's going to be picky. All right, so it was 3 radical 2. Now let's look at the next one. How many of you believe it's the first answer? 5 radical 3. So lots more people this time, about half the class. And how many of you think it's 7 radical 3? All right, so let's look. We're going to write 75 because it's radical 75 and we need to simplify. So we need to write that in terms of a perfect square factor. What is our perfect square factor we're going to use for 75? Anybody? 25. And 25 is a perfect square of what? 5. So it's 25 times what? 3. When you see the number 25, think of a quarter. Think of money. So how many quarters go into 75 cents? 3 quarters. Okay. So start thinking money. Everybody's familiar with that. All right, so now split it up. Radical 25, radical 3. And what is the square root of 25? 5. Guys, everybody should be yelling that out. So a square root means what can I multiply together to get that number? What can I square? What times what equals 25? 5. So the answer for square root of 25 is equal to 5. And guys, if you don't know this or you're foggy about this, you need to go out on Khan Academy, go out to YouTube and just write in radicals, square roots, help with square roots, square root basics, and start watching every video. And also there's our textbook, that you can go get all the help you need. Go out to the virtual nerd and click back on her, because all of those links are interactive and you can work backwards actually into easier and easier math till you find those radicals. So you need to get all the practice you can get, because this is something we have to do a lot of. Okay, so this is 5 radical 3. This is as simplified as we're going to get it. Any questions on that one? All right, and now let's look at the last one. We had 3 different answers. So for time's sake, I'm just going to start working it. So we've got negative radical 32. We're going to keep that negative sign out there. So is there a perfect square factor for 32? Let's see. Let's write all the factors of 32. We've got 1 times 32, and we have 2 times what? 16. 16 is a square of what? 4. So that's our perfect square factor, 16 times 2. So now that's going to be equal to negative square root of 16 times 2. And the square root of 16 is what? We just said it, 4. So we have negative 4 times radical 2. And that's all there is to these, guys. That's your answer. So the second choice was correct. Okay?
I thought it was 4
Excuse me?
4 power of 2. And then times 2. Negative radical 4 power of 2 times 2.
Okay, negative radical 4 power of 2 times 2. Well, radical 4 times radical 4. Let's look at what that is. Well, square root of 4 is 2, right? It's square root of 4 is 2. And 2 times 2 is 4. So this is not in a simplified form. Okay, we shouldn't have any squares in a simplified form. So it comes out to 4, and then you lost your radical on the 2. So that is not correct, right? So if maybe I need to find another worksheet and give you guys some extra homework this weekend on radicals, and let's strengthen those radical chops back up, okay? At this point, I hate to do this, but I've got to move on. We're using very little of this in our assignment today, but we do have to know it. So at this point, we've got to backtrack to yesterday's assignment and grade yesterday's work. So I'm going to pause the video. Okay, I'm going to go over a couple of these. We've just checked our homework, and I'm back on the video. So I want to first work this word problem. Okay, it says you can represent the area of a square tabletop with the expression, here's our tabletop, 16x squared plus 24x plus 9. What is the side length of the tabletop in terms of x? And what we have to do is realize for a tabletop we've got a length and a width. Well, we have one trinomial here, but we know if we can factor the trinomial, we're going to get it down to 2 terms. So if we can do that, we could say that one of them is the length and one of them is the width, right? So let's look at this. If we look at all the things that we did yesterday, the process that you need to do is look at your A term. It's 16. Can I factor this out of all of these? No, I cannot factor out of 16 because 16 doesn't go evenly into 24, and it certainly doesn't go into 9. So our next step is say, is there a factor of 16 that we can factor out of everything? No, there's not. We've got 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16. And none of those go into 9. Okay. One thing that I do see is that 16x squared is a perfect square. It's a perfect square of 4x. And my last term is also a perfect square of 3. And we had that formula that said a squared plus 2ab plus b squared is equal to what? A plus b squared. And same thing for the minus, except there's a minus there and a minus there. Okay? But right now, this is all positive, so we've got the first scenario. So that means that my A must be 4x, my B must be 3. So let's check and see if we can multiply or do our 2AB and see if that matches 24x. Well, A times B is 4x times 3, that's 12x. Now, times 2, so double it, 24x. That does match our middle term. So we match this scenario. That means that our answer is going to be a plus b squared. So our answer becomes 4x plus 3 squared. That means it's 4x plus 3 times 4x plus 3. That means that one side is the length and one side is the width, or you could say these are all sides because it's a perfect square. So that is how our answer becomes 4x plus 3. Okay? Any questions on that? All right, so let's back up to another one. I had a student come up and ask me and say, I worked this out and it just takes so long. And I said, but had you realized, you know, we had some things that we wrote in our notes yesterday. Let me find it. Get there. Oh, it's further in the video or in the presentation. Here it is. So we had some rules that I threw out there. Factoring a difference of 2 squares. If we have something in this form, or factoring a perfect square trinomial. I just talked about that. That's the one we just did. So if you notice you've got things in this format, you don't have a whole lot of work to do. Go back to I'll find it. So that is also why I had you write this in your notes yesterday, is because it's all the things that you need to do this assignment. So if you see you have something in this format like the one we just did, or in the negative of that, you can quickly, without any long drawn out process, say that's the answer and that's the answer. Well, if you notice you have a square minus a square, it's called the difference of two squares, then you know that's going to be your answer. And there's no long drawn out mathematical concept to do or process. So let's look at these again. On 36, we have 25x squared minus 9. Okay, so look at this. Is that a perfect square? Yes. Of what? 5x. Is this a perfect square? Yes. Of what? 3. So we've got something in the form of a squared minus b squared, which is the difference of two squares. The difference meaning that it's subtracted of two squares. One square, two squares. And when we have this, we can say the answer is going to be equal to a plus b times a minus b. And this is just from yesterday. So it's going to be 5x plus 3 times 5x minus 3. Okay? So for those of you who missed that and worked it out the long way, don't forget when I give you formulas, check back on them. Okay? Check for the easy shortcuts before you do the long way. Okay? Otherwise, it probably would have taken you a couple of hours to get through all that work. But this way, it's real quick to recognize, and you'll get to where you look for that first. If there's two terms, look, are they both perfect squares? Oh, you've got the difference of two squares. So easy, no math involved, basically, except to get your square roots. Any questions on that? Okay, let's look at one other thing. So yesterday we also talked and did a lot of the a term. When you can't factor out an a term, you do the a times c. Rewrite that middle term as those two factors. Divide it in half, factor that side, and then regroup. That's what we did yesterday, okay? Did anybody have any trouble with that process? Okay, clear your desk, and we're going to do a quick quiz. I'm going to pause the video here. So, okay, the recording's going again. So our quiz, we had 2 minutes to solve the problem, and let's look at this. We've got 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. And this is basically the easiest problem, the first problem on your homework. So you've already worked it, you already checked it. And this basically shows me, are you really doing your homework, are you not? But it's also a quiz grade. So make sure you're doing your homework, because when I don't take it up, I'm certainly going to quiz you most every time. So here you're going to look at these and say, okay, can I factor, I've got, my a is bigger than 1, so can I factor it out? No, I can't. So I'm going to have to do my a times c. Okay, so it's 2 times 6, which is 12. And what two factors of 12 add up to be 7? How about 4 and 3? So I'm going to rewrite this middle term as 4x plus 3x. So I'm going to have 2x squared plus 4x plus 3x plus 6. All I did was rewrite this middle term with 4x plus 3x. Now the next step is to divide it in half and factor each side. So on this side I can factor out a 2x, and what's left over is x plus 2. And on this side I can factor out a 3. And what's left over? X plus 2. Now compare what you have. My two binomials are the same, x plus 2. Because they're the same, I can regroup this as 2x plus 3 times x plus 2. Right? The same thing, just grouped differently. Now, that's my answer. And if that's what you put, then you got it correct. How do you check your work? FOIL it back out. Okay. Any questions? Okay.
But can you slide it out a little
Okay. So again, A times C, what two factors of that add up to be my middle term? Replace your middle term with those two factors, divide it in half, factor each side, and regroup. How do you check it? FOIL it back out. So 2x times x is 2x squared plus 6x plus 3x plus 6. And 6x and 3x is 9x. So 2x squared plus 9x plus 6. Does that match my original equation? Whoops, no it doesn't. So what do we do? Did I make an error? Anybody find the error? Okay, let's look at the check again. 2x times x is 2x squared. Outside 2x times 2 is not 6x, it's 4x. Nobody caught that. Okay. Now 4x plus 3x is 7x. Now does that match my original equation? Okay. So sometimes the error might be in your check. Alright. So this does check out. So the 2x plus 3 times x plus 2 is the original answer. Okay? Any questions over that? Okay, and you've done 2 pages of those now, so hopefully you're good. Now we're going to move on. We're going to now solve. We're going to factor and then solve. Like, what makes this expression true? What if I set those two binomials equal to 0? That's what we're going to do. Well, if I have two things and I set them equal to 0, let's say, what if I have a times b and I set that equal to 0? Because we could just say the first binomial, whatever it is a, and the second binomial is b. Well, if I have this situation and a times b is 0, that means that either a must be 0, right? Or b equals 0. Right? Or both. So when we solve these, we have to figure out, well, what makes our binomial equal to 0? So let's take a peek at how to do these. So if we have solved this trinomial here, x squared minus 5x plus 6 equal to 0, well, we're just going to do the magic x and say what two factors of 6 add up to be negative 5. Well, what's it going to be? X minus 2 times x minus 3. And if we set that equal to 0, well, what would make that true? What makes x minus 2 equal to 0 when x is equal to what? What would x have to be equal to make x minus 2 0? Say again? 2. Yes. So this becomes true when x equals 2, or what about this one? What does x have to be here for x minus 3 to equal 0? 3. So x equals 2 or x equals 3 is the answer to the solution to make these true. So we call these our zeros to the solution. So your answer becomes x equals 2 or x equals 3. That's all there is to it. How do you check this work? We'll plug them back in and make sure it makes a true statement. So let's plug in a 2 for x. And what do you get? 2 minus 2 is 0. And 2 minus 3 is negative 1. So 0 times negative 1 is 0. Checks out. Now plug in your 3. 3 minus 2 is 1. 3 minus 3 is 0. 1 times 0 is 0. It checks out. So those are our solutions, and that's how you check. Are there any questions there? So notice that they're not even showing how to factor anymore. They're just going from the trinomial to the factor. Okay, so you have to know it that well. Not that you can do all that in your head, but you have to understand that they're just not going to show anymore. They expect you know how to do all that that's missing between that step and that step. All right, let's look at the next problem. What are the solutions of the quadratic equation, and I've written it bigger here, 5x squared plus 30x plus 4 equal 2 minus 2x? Well, the first thing we have to do is realize that's not equal to 0. We've got to get this in standard form. So we have to subtract 2 from each side, and we have to add 2x to each side. And when we do, we get this equation. We get 5x squared plus 32x plus 12 equal 0. So now we're going to solve this. I can't factor the 5 out of everything, and 5's prime, so I need to move on to the a times c, because this is not a perfect square either. So I have to do a times c. So 5 times 12 is 60. Well, what two factors of 60 add up to be 32? Well, it's pretty apparent it's going to be 30 times 2, right? So let's rewrite that middle term as 30x plus 2x and carry down the rest. All right, now divide it in half and factor each side. So we can factor out a 5x times x plus 6. And over here I can factor out a 2 and x plus 6 equal 0. All right, so now I can regroup. So I have 5x plus 2 times x plus 6 equal 0. So now I've got my a times b equals 0. So what makes my a equal to 0? What does x have to be? Well, if you don't see that, just go ahead and solve for it. 5x plus 2 equals 0. So subtract 2 from each side, and you get a negative 2. And then divide each side by 5. So x equals negative 2/5. So there's your first one. And then what about for b? What does x have to equal here? That one's easy. Negative 6. So there's our answers. Okay. Any questions? Pretty easy. Let's look at the third example. What are the solutions of the quadratic equation? And I've got it here. 2x squared plus 7x equal 15. Well, again, we've got to get it equal to 0, so we have to subtract 15 from each side. Then we get this, 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 equal 0. So we've now rewritten this in standard form. They always have to be in standard form, equal to 0. Okay. So now nothing I can factor out, so again I've got to do my a times c. So 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. And what two factors of negative 30 add up to be 7? What's it going to be? We've got 30 times 1, 2 times 15, 3 times 10. There it is, 10 and 3. Which one has to be the negative? The 3, because my 7's positive. When I add them together, it's got to be a positive 7. So now rewrite the middle term as 10x minus 3x. And carry everything else down. Now divide it in half. And now factor each side. So I can factor out a 2x over here, x plus 5. And over here I can factor out a negative 3. So when I factor out the negative, both of these signs are going to flip inside the binomial because I've taken it out, right? So what's left over? An x plus 5 equal 0. Now, do my binomials match? Yes, they do. So I can regroup 2x minus 3 times x plus 5 equal 0. Now we can solve. So this x is easy, right? X equals what for my second one? Negative 5. And can anyone do that in their head yet? If not, set it equal to 0 and solve. So add 3 to each side and then divide each side by a 2. So we've got x equal 3/2. So there's our two answers, x equal 3/2 and x equal negative 5. Any questions? Okay, I know I put that on hyperdrive there, but we spent a lot of time up front with some review, so I had to rush through this. Let's get our whiteboards now and work one of these problems. What are the solutions of the quadratic equation? And it's x squared plus 2x minus 24 equal 0. So let's give you a minute, see where you're at in a minute. You should be able to do it in a minute. All right, and I'll pause the video now. Okay, so wherever you're at in the process, stop. And let's see, rows 1 and 2, hold your boards up nice and high. Okay, rows 3 and 4, nice and high where I can see them. Okay, rows 5 and 6. Okay, so I saw that a lot of you are on your way. You were at the magic X and you didn't quite get to the conclusion, so don't erase. Let's just catch up. Let me catch up with where you're at and let's finish this, okay? So you would start with, okay, what two factors of negative 24 add up to be 2, right? So it's going to be what? A positive 6 and a negative 4. So it's going to be x plus 6, oops, that's an x, times x minus 4. So what makes each of these equal to 0? Well, when x is equal to what? On here, what makes x plus 6 equal to 0? Negative 6. And what makes this one equal to 0? When x is positive 4. And that's all there is to it, guys. That's all there is to it. So some of you were really going above and beyond, making it a lot harder than it had to be. But a lot of you were still stuck right here, trying to figure out what are my two factors. There was no rewriting the middle term because our a value was 1. Okay, so this was the most basic of those problems. All right, any questions on this? All right, so your homework tonight is on 4-5, 1 through 17 all, and 18 through 22 evens. And we will turn these in. So I'm not always going to say, let's grade it and you keep it. So tomorrow we will be turning in, so make sure you're showing me your magic X and you're showing me you've got this stuff. No papers with answers only. I will not accept it. Okay? Any questions? All right, thank you very much, and that concludes our video.